everybody. Good morning, and thank you all for being here today with us in the AOSIS Pavilion. I'm Sasha Jatan Singh, and I'm the Commonwealth National Climate Finance Advisor to Antigua and Barbuda. And my colleagues here today with me is Miss Krista Joy Booton, who is the Technical Officer Grants at the Department of Environment in Antigua and Barbuda. And we also have Mr. Craig Cole, who is the Deputy EDA Project Coordinator at the Department of Environment. And the focus of this, it will be an interactive dialogue. That's why we wanted people to come closer. It's not formal, it's sharing of experiences, best practices, and innovations that we've learned along the way in implementing and programming the SAFE Fund to local communities in Antigua and Barbuda. And the SAFE Fund is Antigua and Barbuda's National Environmental Fund. It's called the Sustainable Island Resource Framework Fund. And it serves as the primary channel for environmental climate mitigation and adaptation funding, and it's capitalized by international as well as domestic sources. So in terms of domestic sources, that could be, taxes, levies, visitor fees, and so forth. That aspect of it it's still being developed in terms of the legislation and so on. However, right now the SAFE Fund is financed by international climate and environmental funds such as the GCF, the JEF, and the Adaptation Fund right now. And currently, under the GCF, Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, and Dominica are currently implementing a regional project called the Integrated Physical Adaptation and Community Resilience through an enhanced direct access pilot in the public, private, and civil society sectors of 3 Eastern Caribbean SIDS. So the short name for that project is the EDA project. I don't think anybody in the project team remembers the name of it. So that's why Craig is our EDA coordinator. And then under this EDA project, we have, responsive small grants and loan award mechanisms. And the SAFE Fund allows that. What the SAFE Fund wants to do is to ensure that, funding is accessible to the most vulnerable communities and sectors through financing mechanisms that are easy for them to access. So if that might be, the unbankable small businesses, homes, and so on, in order to implement, adaptation measures to ensure that their buildings and their livelihoods are more resilient. And what we want to do is really and truly share with you all the best practices and lessons learned so far from the small grants and concessional loans experiences in Antigua and Barbuda, because this aspect of the EDA project was piloted, was rolled out in Antigua and Barbuda first, and soon Grenada and Dominica will be launching their small grants and concessional loans programs under the EDA project. So we want to share with you right now what we've done and what we've learned so far in terms of the design, the implementation, the stakeholder engagement, and technical support so far to really empower vulnerable communities to access this much needed finance for resilience building. So I think right now what I want to do is hand over to Craig to introduce our video to really show you what happens in the communities in Antigua and Barbuda and why this funding is so important that it has to reach them in order to build their resilience. And this is something that AOSIS has been, we've been advocating for. We need to ensure that there is accessible and adequate financing for adaptation. And you're going to see why this is important to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. and thank you for being with us. What you're about to see is a video that would have been shot in Cashew Hill. And Cashew Hill is the site of one of our projects. In the Cashew Hill area, there is a basin-like shape that prevents the water from draining easily. And that area floods very easily, and it presents a lot of issues for the persons within that region, especially in the areas of health and wellness. And we are addressing that issue through the EDA. And you're going to hear from the stakeholders on the ground about their experience, just a short video. And that particular project will address 3,800 feet of waterway, along with the development of 3 ponds, which will be part of what we will use to address the issue as mentioned before, along with other measures that we're going to implement. The particular measure in that area is valued at approximately $3 million US. And you will also hear from Krista about our grants program, and I will share a bit with you about the loans program. And then you'll be able to ask as many questions as you wish. Please bear in mind that it's a pilot project. And therefore, as a result, we will have issues as we go along. We will make mistakes. That's the whole idea of this forum, that we share, that we learn from each other so that our mistakes do not become your mistakes. And at the same time, if you're seeking to scale up in any way, you can also be able to learn from us what measures we would have used, what would have worked for us, and modify it to suit your own situation. So we will watch the video now, and then we'll hear from Krista.
How long you live in Cashew Hill?
Nearly over 80 years. The last heavy rain come, Karen so couldn't pass the last heavy rain come, I think the last Monday. Karen can't pass.
So how do you feel about the project?
Well, the only time when me feel good and when me see start.
Okay.
They tell me feel more better.
Okay.
It hurting me. It hurt my business. And flood all around. Up to now, my car get flooded out more than once. And the place under my house, in my shop, on my all over.
Okay. So the water gets into your house and into
more than
the shop.
one time. Yeah. I have mosquito issues. I have a lot of flooding issues and mosquito issues.
Okay.
And mud all over the place. Look at last night, the rainfall. Look at it was full this morning.
Right here.
Yeah, around here was full up this morning.
Okay.
I'm excited about the project. I'm very excited about the project, and I hope it helped me out with my business and my family too, because I have grandkids, and sometimes they cannot come outside because of flooding, because they can drown right in my yard. Yeah, because it's a lot of water. And so it's a lot of water that's be all over in the yard, all over in my car, in my everything.
What the problem? The water. Them you can feed the water, you can feed them. See them you can feed that. Them you can do, no feed the house. Feed the water, put the water around. That the government and people feed the water, put something. You put one something the water run good, and not there no problem no more.
I have been living in Cashew Hill for 25 years, and ever since I live in here, I just seen a lot of flooding when rain come. It's the same thing over and over and over and over. Behind here we flood, underneath the house we flood, the pipe we flood, the road we flood by the yellow shop, and high water.
Right, so you're left without a home once the flooding starts.
I just left. Tree house just behind me. I just go and stay for 3 days and then come back when the water just run out.
Okay, so how you feel about the project that we're doing to pave the entire waterway and widen the waterway?
How I feel? Well, I feel good to see that people come in and try to help.
Right. Okay.
That's all we really want.
Right.
Just the help, so the water don't have to come back again.
Right.
Like when heavy rain come.
Y'all have to really work fast on the gutter before any more big rain go come, because that's very serious behind it. Very serious. The neighbor them face a lot of problem with the gutter, have to throw a lot of them appliances and TV, radio, all kind of something on there. But some of them throw a lot of something for inside, they get messed up. So as quick as possible, we don't like the gutter for deal with as quick as possible. And it's real bad. Real bad farm, real bad. Real bad.
Because the last flooding that came, they came some months ago. Everything went quick, plenty water. That was strong on their feet because I was over there. So when you see the water run off and I think it's safe to come past, that thing started twisting my foot. I never see that here. What I'm accustomed to seeing here is the water rising past the step like it coming in the house, but not pushing, just rising. See, but that's why when I talk about the gutter line I'm going to deal with, I think that's a good idea. Help it to flow, to get off, because there's plenty of water just come up high like you want to come inside the house.
Right.
So thanks for that video, Craig and Krista Joy and the EDA project team. And before we continue, I just want Craig and Krista to just give a little background about the project in terms of why this flooding issue is so important to fix and to address before we go into the grants and loans for this particular community.
Sorry. Back in 2014, thereabout, there was a local area plan developed for the Cashwell area. The area has been inundated with flooding for year upon year, and the residents in that area have suffered heavily. As you just saw in the video, it's not easy. It's very difficult for these persons to leave home to go to work, for children to go to school. As the lady mentioned a while ago, and it may sound strange, if her children step out of the house during that period, they will drown because the water level rises very high. As I mentioned, it's like a basin, and the development within that area is ad hoc. It was not planned, and there are many persons who would have moved in there without permission over the years, and therefore the area has suffered not only from the natural situation, but because of the unplanned developments within the area, which have exacerbated the situation. And so we need to do something about that to prevent it from getting worse. That community is surrounded by other communities, which will eventually, they are being affected right now because of what is happening there. And so we have sought to present what we refer to as a 1 in 50 development plan, so that the water can be properly channeled and treated. However, based upon the layout of the area along the waterway, we had to modify that to a 1 in 20 so that we do not move anyone. We are not allowed, as a result of agreements, etc., we're not allowed to move anyone from their property. Neither are we allowed to purchase land for the project. So we have to work within the parameters of our agreement, and that is something that we also need to bear. We discussed the FMCA in the last outing with the CARICOM Pavilion, and within the FMCA we spoke about the the policies that we have in place and for managing money, etc. When we make agreements with such as this with GCF and other bodies, we have to honor those agreements. And so in implementing the plan, we bear those things in mind. And as you have seen, the constituents of, the villagers are very much inclined to work with us. And we're willing to push ahead. They have been waiting a long time. They've suffered greatly. We shared thoughts of what would have happened in Barbuda recently with others, where PTSD has affected many as post-traumatic stress disorder. You have to be in a situation like that to understand. And if I might just mention before Krista begins to present, we could look at the situation with Barbuda, which we shared. Barbuda was devastated by a hurricane in one night. And there was another hurricane coming. That was about 4 years ago. There was another hurricane behind of that one. And we had to evacuate everybody from that island in a short period of time. A lot of effort went into volunteering to move people, feed them, house them, etc., because we didn't have enough shelters, which is what Chris is going to speak about in just a while. We didn't have the capacity to absorb everyone immediately into the society as we would have liked to. So we had to modify overnight. And the other storm was approaching, and I remember standing there welcoming people, trying to make them feel comfortable. And people would be coming in their nightgowns with a plastic bag with whatever they could have salvaged. And there was a situation where one lady spoke later on to the media, and she mentioned her experience after, in between sobs and just trying to hold herself together. She mentioned about a child being carried through the storm because the place was devastated. They were trying to find shelter. And because of the height of the water, the child was lifted into the air to be put on someone else's neck. And in the process, the wind took the child away. And the child was found after the storm, but by then it was too late because there wasn't the possibility of getting medical assistance to the child because the island was devastated, because it was cut off from Antigua for a long time. And you would have to be in a situation like that to understand what it feels like, to see the need for this sort of funding to address matters such as that. And that same night, the storm shifted from us and hit Dominica, which is to the south. And then we had to absorb people from Dominica into Antigua to assist them. So that is what we experience. Whatever assistance we get does not only go to Antigua, it goes to the other islands also because we help each other. And this particular project, the need that these people have is similar to what the people in Barbuda would have experienced, the people in Dominica would have experienced, because when the hurricanes hit, it's not just flooding. We are trying to strengthen the roofs, etc., against hurricanes because the winds for Category 5 are in excess of 150 miles per hour. And so I will allow Krista to share, and as we discuss further, then we will share with you other areas of the experience and other areas of what we do as interventions.
Thanks, Craig. All right, so I'm going to be speaking about the grant funding process that we have at the Department of Environment in Antigua and Barbuda. And as Craig would have mentioned, it is so important for us to have grant funding as well throughout this project and for other projects that we're implementing, just because it also does help a lot of the community organizations to be able to have more purpose-built shelters and to build the resilience of their building infrastructures for that purpose specifically. So the Department of Environment's grants program is designed in line with the Environmental Protection Management Act of 2019, and it is also further elaborated within the EPMA regulations and the Surfund's operational manual. As we would have mentioned, we do receive donor funding from a number of international organizations, specifically international environmental donor organizations such as the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, as well as a number of other international environmental funds. When we're talking about who can be funded through these type of projects, our grants program already provides small grants to homeowners, the private sector entities such as sporting groups, churches, a number of other community service organizations, as well as the public sector, because we do also provide public sector grants, and to farmers and fishers as well. Now we're going to look a bit at the EDA project specifically. So we're just going to give a snapshot. So as Sasha would have mentioned before, it is called the Integrated Physical Adaptation and Community Resilience through an enhanced direct access pilot in the public, private, and civil society sectors in 3 Caribbean small island states. And our project team specifically calls it the Enhanced Direct Access Project for short, or the EDA project. And this project is being funded by the Green Climate Fund. So the 3 island states which are gaining funding from this project are Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, and Grenada. And specifically for component 3 of this project, where the grants component would come into play, each country would get 1 million available. And specifically for Antigua and Barbuda, we're providing $250,000 per grant awarded. So each of the grant applicants, once they've submitted their proposals, they would be able to apply for up to this amount. The objectives of the grants component, we're looking at the total amount of beneficiaries. So the project has approximately 12,000 persons overall throughout the 3 Caribbean islands benefiting from these climate adaptation projects in communal assets, and that is looking at community centers, shelters, churches, and other community organizations. In Antigua and Barbuda specifically, we are looking at providing funding for church organizations. So at this time, we have provided funding, or at least we have provided an award of grant funding to 4 churches thus far, but we do have funding available for up to 5 churches to receive these adaptation grants. What can be funded? So we would have started off mentioning the importance of adaptation, especially in the Caribbean region. So the funding is specifically for adaptation interventions in different communities. And for the EDA project, we are looking at the Cashew Hill area, but we do have other projects that will also be able to benefit from this program as we operationalize the SURF Fund. So we're looking at physical adaptation, targeting building structures, communal and public good assets. And it's especially important because Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, and other Caribbean countries suffer so much from a lot of tropical storms and flooding, such as Hurricanes Erica, Maria, Irma, and Ivan. So for the adaptation options, when applicants are providing their proposals, they're able to look at options such as water management, climate smart buildings, so that's looking at the actual building structures and the sustainable building practices that are expected of groups now when they're promoting their project interventions, and that is trying to in keeping with moving towards net zero and more greener infrastructures. You can also have adaptation options such as flooding control and structural adjustments that increase climate change resilience. The eligible beneficiaries for the EDA project. So as I would have mentioned before, we are looking at community organizations in the Cashew Hill area in Antigua and Barbuda, and the criteria that we utilize when we're reviewing proposals is ensuring that is strong transparency provided by these community groups. So when they're requesting funding, it's so important for us to know exactly what the funding will be used for, and to see that sense of community ownership as well when they're proposing their projects. So a lot of these groups would already be participating in many community-led activities and events, maybe even providing activities such as after-school learning for children, and providing their buildings for other events that might not necessarily be specifically to what their organization is completing. So we have community organizations that can apply for grant funding to support adaptation in the buildings that they own, because they also have to show that they do own the buildings that they will be improving. And the organizations can propose that the shelter management measures that will be put in place to assist the most vulnerable persons within their area and within their organizations. So many times when organizations propose that they will be purpose-built shelters, for instance, they might say that the members of their congregation would be the persons to benefit the most from the shelter. But in oftentimes, there are also, as you would have seen from the video, there are also a lot of other vulnerable persons within that community. So depending on the capacity of the shelters, they're also able to list out a number of shelteries who are in that area and not just within their church. So when we're selecting these projects, there is an indicative criteria that we utilize. So they have to provide the number of beneficiaries and disaggregate it by gender to make sure, because we are looking at environmental social safeguards as well as gender equality. Also looking at the poverty levels of target beneficiary populations, alignment with national development plans and climate change strategies. So they do have to make sure that they include green strategies within their proposals. So that's looking at activities such as putting on solar PV systems, maybe wind energy, anything that is typically proposed within our environmental management plan. The applicants are also required to provide co-financing, proof that they will be able to co-finance their project. It doesn't have to be monetary, it can also be in kind, and that's showing the persons who will be working. So we're looking at the laborers who will be working on the project, whether it's providing technical assistance or management for the project as it continues. As well as we're looking at linkages to community disaster or climate vulnerability assessments, impact that the project will have on life, property, and community assets, as well as the reasoning for why they need this project within their community, the impact that disasters or flooding, etc., has already had on their community negatively, the reasons why they would need to implement this project in their area, as well as the impact on biodiversity and ecosystem services. So we also want to ensure that when projects are being implemented, it's not going to affect the natural environment that's in the area of that facility. So just to continue on the criteria, applicants are also required to provide evidence of and capacity for sustainability and maintenance. So this is more looking at their previous knowledge of project management or coordination or any previous activities that they might have engaged with within the community itself to that would prove that they're able to actually manage a project. However, throughout the entire process prior to them receiving funding, we do also provide a number of training workshops for our applicants to get them accustomed to understanding project management, understanding about shelter management, the waterways, climate change. But I'll also touch on that a bit later. Looking as well at capacity to replicate and upscale the project. So ensuring that they might even be able to train other persons within the community, other organizations, to be able to have a similar project. Because we do want to ensure that there are more purpose-built shelters and there are more resilient buildings. So not just as shelters, but ensuring the resilience of the buildings in general within our community are better. The ready availability of requisite technology and capacity for implementation. Similar to what I would have spoken of before in terms of project management capabilities. We're also looking at feasibility of costs against budget and feasibility of implementation or construction within the deadline. So once the applicants are submitting their proposals, they must also provide a detailed budget to explain to us the cost of each of the activities and if it will be in keeping with what we typically know these type of interventions may cost. And if not, we're also able to assist them to restructure the budget. Also looking at the assessment of potential encumbrances, ESS and gender actions, mentioning that, I would have mentioned that before, they do have to ensure that they're looking at environmental social safeguards as well as gender when they're considering certain activities. How will enhanced direct access work in the civil society sector? So the eligibility for ungranting under Component 3 of the EDA project is that they must be a registered community group under national law. They must have ownership for their buildings. They must be able to provide the documentation as proof that they are able to facilitate this type of project. And they must also have the ability to mobilize cash as well as in-kind co-financing, and specifically 25% co-financing in comparison to the funding that is available. So for the process of ungranting, the Department of Environment has thus far developed an operational guideline for these community groups, and that is inclusive of a communication strategy for when they're providing their messaging to the media, as well as to inform their own organization of the activities that are taking place within the project itself. We're also providing the eligibility of qualifying NGOs and CSOs to ensure that prior to their submission, they are knowledgeable if they are in fact eligible for this project and for the grant funding available. We've also created an ungranting checklist. That it's a very long checklist that would explain to the applicants the entire process prior to their submission of their full proposals, to ensure that they're aware of the actions that we have to take as a department to provide them with all of the necessary guidelines, but also a checklist that tells them all of the activities that they need to complete prior to submitting their proposals. We've also designed an evaluation criteria for the pre and full proposals. So we do have a concept note section that has to be sent through first, and once they've completed their concept note, they then move on to providing a full proposal. We also deliver training workshops for grant applicants, as I would have mentioned before. So those training workshops are inclusive of shelter management, climate change adaptation, and waterway management, as well as grant proposal writing. And finally, up to $5,000 US can be awarded to each of the grant applicants for them to complete their project preparation, and that would be the concept note that they have to complete in order to submit their full proposal. Once they've submitted a concept note to explain what their project will entail, the applicants will then be evaluated. The applications will be evaluated by our several committees. And then if the applicants do receive an award and do receive, sorry, one moment. Apologies. All right, so as I was saying, once the applicants would have submitted their concept note, they do go through an evaluation process, and after which, once we have evaluated those applications that have gone through, they will then be able to get a review of what we have found from their application, and thereafter they'll have to submit a full proposal in order to get the total $250,000 grant. All right, so for our checklist, these are just some of the required processes when we're looking at the applications. So we're ensuring that they would have provided a concept note, their full proposal that is inclusive of looking at environmental and social impact and gender, and also ensuring that an environmental impact assessment would have been completed on the surrounding area. The applicants would also have to submit their technical designs So they would have to ensure that they have a contractor assisting them with completing their designs that will go along with their proposal, and submitting building permits that will be required depending on the interventions that they will be completing. And finally, they will also be submitting an M&E plan and their detailed budget. All right, so in the identification of the NGOs, as I would have mentioned, we do have a number of committees that will take part in the completion of the evaluations. So on the ground, looking at the physical structure of the buildings, when we do get applications, we do have a technical expert committee, and that can include different experts depending on what the interventions require. So persons from either their building inspectors, fire officers, engineers, electricians, gender experts, as well as any other types of experts necessary. And for the actual evaluation of the proposals once they are submitted, we also have a technical evaluation committee that will utilize the evaluations that they would have gotten from the expert committee, and they will go through the proposals. So right now, these would be the qualifications for the evaluation committee that we have right now for the EDA project specifically. So just to go through the steps really quickly, first we have a call for proposals that is published. Then we have a briefing session where we actually meet with the different applicants or the persons in the area that we are targeting so that they are more aware of the requirements. Then we have the reviewing body, reviewing all of the applications. Once they have selected the grantees that should be receiving the award, we do provide them with a small preparation grant for them to complete their full proposals. Step 5 would be the actual submission of the full proposals, which then goes through a final review. And we have a funding decision by our project management committee and our SURF fund board to have the final approval of these applications. Once grants have been awarded, we then publish them online for persons to be able to view the applicants and the persons who would have been awarded the grants. So you can see on the screen, you just see the full details of the grant awarded, the date that it's awarded, and more information about the grantees. And now I'll turn it over to Craig.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to share with you that throughout all of this, the SURF is involved. We bear in mind that the SURF, the Sustainable Island Resource Fund, manages the funds that are programmed through this particular exercise. And all these committees would have to be approved by the Project Management Committee and the SURF Fund Board. And the SURF Fund Board itself also has membership, which would include persons from civil society, persons who are involved in these community-based organizations also. Because one of the things we bear in mind is that we can have experts handling a committee, we can have experts handling funds, but do they understand what is happening on the ground? Do they appreciate the experience that the people are going through? And so we need the people themselves to be a part of the process so that they can speak for themselves. And so we try to include them as much as possible. So when you initiate such a venture, please bear that in mind. With regards to the loan process, you would have seen the criteria that would have been shared. Our loans are designed to be concessional. Our loans are designed to help the people. We're not about making money. The SURF Fund is not about ensuring that there is a debt collection officer standing at your door if you don't pay at the end of the month. That is not the way the process works. And so to get a loan, first of all, the persons who are who qualify within a particular criteria, they can apply. Once they apply, they go through the process of having that application checked. Once the application is checked, they are called in further for discussions. They also experience a workshop where they're trained and certain things are shared with them about the process and what needs to be done. As Krista mentioned, we talk about things like climate change adaptation and waterway management, etc. But also what it means to strengthen their home and what it means for those around them. They need to understand that process also. And so the same measures that are employed for the churches are also employed for the homeowners. So we do things like strengthening the roof. If you're going to put PV systems on a roof, you need to strengthen the roof. And so we have to strengthen the roof to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. We also provide the PV system so that if in the event that the electricity is lost, in the event that electricity is lost, they will be able to continue to have some measure of electricity. And once that is available, then they can also help others. That is the same for the churches because the grid normally gets knocked out once there is a storm. And water itself will be shut off to prevent contamination and also to ensure that if there are ruptured lines, we don't have loss of water because we also suffer from droughts. So the homeowners themselves have to be provided with funding so that they can actually have cisterns also or other catchments. And also for raising the buildings, elevating them. You would have seen what happened with the flooding there. We provide funding for elevating the homes, raising them, also strengthening the structure of the building. I have seen cases in which tornadoes have been developed in the midst of hurricanes. And in one case, there was only a toilet left standing in the home and a concrete structure. The tornado just ripped it apart. And so we bear that in mind also when we provide the funding. They can receive loans of up to 200,000 EC or 75,000 US. And it depends on what they need done. We don't just give the money for the sake of giving money. They must identify the areas that need to be checked. The tech team will visit and ensure that that is what is necessary and also provide advice. I must stop at this point and let you know that we need to safeguard the funds which are given to us. And as a result, we also seek to provide institutional capacity assessments for the churches themselves or other organizations and also for other entities that would be receiving large sums of money. That is very important. We need to check their backgrounds and make sure that they're not only able to handle the money, but also that their tax payments, etc., are in place, their boards are in place, they're meeting regularly, etc. So when it comes to the loans also, we will not put the homeowners under excessive pressure in that case. But what we do for those individuals or entities that get large quantities of money, and we need to ensure that this is done, we put that in place. So the homeowners themselves also are eligible for grants if they have specific issues. Like, for example, a lady who is the only breadwinner for her home, who lives along the waterway, for example, who is impacted more than others. That person, if there's a person in the home with a disability, a grant of up to 6,500 could be provided to assist. For example, building rails, providing wheelchair access, etc. Once that person has gone through the process and it is approved by the board, funding will be provided and monitored. Just as with the grants program, we have a monitoring and evaluation program that goes through the entire process. In order to receive funds, these funds are provided in disbursements for both the churches and for the homeowners. So at each stage, checks are carried out to ensure that what was promised is done. And this is very important. We are going to ask you to ask questions. Feel free to ask of us what happens during the process, etc., because you need to know and we're willing to share. Please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much to Craig and Krista. And I mean, the thing is, I've been working with Craig and Krista for the past almost a year on the rollout of the loans and grants for the EDA project. But I find with these presentations that you tend to hear from, at COP for the past week and some, it really doesn't explain the process and what happened and how did we learn from rolling out the grants. And initially, from the first set of grants from the SIR fund, we had very low uptake, grants and loans. And we realized that, and Craig and Krista could tell you, that we're learning, and we're learning that things that learnings and best practices, thing we're still learning how to convey this to others. But what we realize is how we publicize the grants and the loans, and that whole process started from sharing it on the websites, and then informing people, by, if it's at the DOA and so on. But what we realized is that when we actually started going into the communities, doing walkabouts, talking with them, explaining that these are funds available to community members, to churches, to CSOs, this is what you could do, and then identifying what sort of training needs were. And then that's how they designed the workshops. And then right away there was a lot more interest. Craig could tell you about how he would go and meet with the pastors at the churches. And the churches then, when they realize that, oh, this funding, these concessional loans, which are quite low, it's just 2%, which is fantastic. An interest rate of 2% anywhere in the Caribbean.
We go as low as 1%
Oh,
in special
at
cases.
Yeah, exactly. So it's supposed to be 2%, but we realize that that's the need in that community. They are, economically disadvantaged community in Cashew Hill. And when Craig and Kristen, they go and talk to the pastors on board, they could fire up their congregation and say, this is important. We need to build capacity. They understand what climate change resilience is for the homes, for the businesses there. And that's what we learned. That's what we had to do. And I think Craig and they could talk more about that.
If I might just mention, as you mentioned, in the midst of COVID, we had difficulties to reach out, and we had to improvise. And so, as you mentioned, in the first portion, we had just about 500,000 dispersed. That's EC dollars. That's just about 200,000 US in over a long period, and they were trickling in. And so we went out into the community. Of course, we had to be careful, but we also reached out to the organization leaders themselves, and we had a flood of persons coming in. I think when we left home, we were at I think 1.78, just about 2 million in terms of loans that are to be processed, etc. The engagement is very important. Krista spoke about this list that we shared with them, the steps. What we realized from previous projects was that the persons who received grants were not engaged as they should have been. And so they would have shared this with us. So we provided a list of every last step involved in the grant process. And we shared that with them to help them to understand what is happening, or what will be happening, sorry. What we need to bear in mind is that when we go through this process, people are going to ask us questions, or ask you questions as to why it takes so long to put a check together, or why is it that you take a week to review a project. These things should be explained from the beginning, so they're ready. And as you go through the process, more communication is important to ensure that they know what is happening, where we're at, what is next, etc. So they feel like they belong to the process, and that is very important.
And I don't know if Krista wants to share a bit about the evaluation process, and how is it that you take the if it's the church groups and the CSOs from the interest in applying for the grant to actually getting that proposal approved and the grant awarded? Because it's not that we just say, look, there's a grant, this is the application, apply for it. It's actually a very in-depth process, a lot of capacity building, one-on-one, identifying the needs for the different groups, because they're at different levels. And I think that's something that the SIF Fund and the EDA project has identified. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution for this, and it has been a learning process. And I think it would be nice for Krista to kind of explain how this came about and what they've been doing to ensure that the church groups and so on actually are able to get these grants, and the monies, as Craig said, were able to be programmed quite quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. I know know, Craig would have touched on it before, like saying that we had to go into the different communities to actually speak with them. But even before, when COVID at first hit, we weren't able to actually meet with persons face to face. So we had to be calling on the phones to try and engage with persons, and it's just calling several times to make sure that we can actually speak to the representatives that would be interested in participating in these types of projects. But it's definitely after we were able to meet face to face to actually explain better the project activities and the options that they had available to them and the types of interventions that they could actually include in their projects. And throughout the entire process, we would have not only just met with them as groups, but also individually. So weekly, we'd have different church representatives coming into in our offices and meeting with us and actually sitting down. And even after we would have provided the checklist to them, we would still have to go further and just explain more in depth about each different step so that they understood fully before they submitted anything to us. So I think that feel safer in terms of submitting anything and asking the questions. And I think they definitely appreciated the fact that they were persons that were willing to help them, even if it was something that it might have been a first time for some of them to actually manage a project. And also, we would have ensured that we partnered with some other local groups, such as the GEF, the Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program. So we would have met with the national coordinator, who would have assisted us with completing an introductory session for these applicants so that they could understand how to submit a proposal, the requirements that each of these proposals would need. And that definitely helped them to improve the proposals that maybe some of them would have already submitted to us previously, and to update them and to make sure that they would have included everything necessary. We would have talked about having the climate change adaptation and waterway management workshops as well. And we also had shelter management workshops. So we partnered a lot with different local groups, including our National Office of Disaster Services, to make sure that we had experts actually telling them the correct information for them to include it in their proposals and for them to carry on that information to the persons within their groups. And then through that, they will be able to basically train other persons in how to understand shelter management better and how to better manage a project in general. So yeah.
No, but that sounds quite interesting, because you see, it's really important to build trust and to build capacity and to identify what the capacity needs are early on and throughout the entire process. Because the whole point of enabling access to finance for vulnerable people and communities is to ensure that they feel comfortable with the process, they understand the entire process, what is the criteria, how to write a proposal, how to do financial management, and you're able to explain that to them so they understand. And then when they understand and they realize that they're getting funded, then they encourage people and they train other people in that community. So it's not the DOE and the Jeff Small Grants program and so on coming in to have these workshops when they can. Now the communities are empowering themselves, and I think that is what we want for the Caribbean, because
Yeah.
it's not just
And
happening here.
they also, I mean, even in having these workshops for them and teaching them and improving their capacity, they even got certification through all of the training workshops they would have engaged in. So that actually improved their level of interest in taking part in the workshops and actually learning, because then they would have had that certification to kind of show this is proof that I understand more of the different topic areas, and I'll definitely be able to manage the projects on the ground.
Yeah, and that's pretty exciting, because you're building their confidence in themselves, in their communities, and in the project partners, and understand what the GCF is. It's not just this big fund that we hear about, but we don't know how to access it. They're actually able to access monies from the GCF through the SAFE Fund and through the EDA project. And I wanted to find out if anybody here has any questions or comments to share with Craig and Krista. Oh.
Thank you. Yeah. It sounds like there's been like so much work that goes into supporting the people who are applying for the grants and identifying the areas and the right processes and things. Given that the climate funds tend not to support the salaries of civil servants or top-ups or provide support through that, how did you manage all this extra time and effort and work that would be coming on so that you can actually maintain these relationships with the grantees? Thank you.
Okay, the process of managing funds, as I mentioned before, is very serious, and we ensure that we follow that which we would have agreed to. In terms of making time, it's all a part of the project management process. That within our team, we have different departments that handle different aspects of the project management. For example, we have an M&E team. We also have a data management team. We have the grants team, a loans team. The SURF itself has a loans team that processes the loans. And also we have persons who deal with that. We have an ESS and gender expert. We also have persons who handle environmental impact assessments. So within our department, we have a wide array of skills which we can draw upon. Also, Krista did mention that we have assistance from civil society, and that is what is important. In implementing programs, it's very important to build relationships. Once we can leverage these relationships, it makes the process easier. For example, the team from the National Office of Disaster Services, they're always willing to help provide information, provide training, etc. We also have built in within the agreements opportunities to contract persons to provide work for us. So we can contract experts in various areas to conduct various aspects of the work, such as engineers, etc. So for example, like the waterway, if we need hydrological studies done, we can, through the process of procurement, which is also very important, we have to go through that process, we can obtain persons who are qualified to get that done, to provide the information. And it doesn't have to be within our country. For example, information needed for the designs for the waterway would have been provided by a company in Trinidad. And we liaise with them, and they provide the necessary information.
Yeah, and just to add quickly to what Craig is saying, the technical expert groups and the evaluation committees that we would be utilizing, they would also be contracted. So they're not within our department, and that also ensures that we're not the ones that are selecting these grantees. It's very objective in terms of the persons that are going to be completing the selection process.
Also, to ensure that there's less bias, we do not know the names of the persons who will be receiving loans. A number is given at the beginning, and that number is used to process the loans all the way through to the SURF board. So the board members themselves do not know who the loan applicants are. And also, for the case of the grantees, we receive the grants within our office, but once we get those, we put a number to those also. So the evaluation committee members, the TAC or technical advisory committee members, they don't know who the applicants are. The project management committee members do not know who the applicants are until we reveal that at the end. So that too helps us to ensure that there is this measure of there isn't the bias, and there's also a measure of a space that's put between us and the applicant in terms of deciding who receives the money. As I mentioned before, we have told the GCF once we've been here that they need to simplify the process. They need to make things easier for us, etc. But on the other hand, we also have to ensure that the process is simplified for us on the ground, and also we need to ensure that it's fair and unbiased. And so while we say things to the GCF, the Adaptation Fund, etc., we must also ensure that we clean house and make sure that happens. So if you're going to implement such a project, those are some of the things that you would need to bear in mind. And as I said, we all learn because it's a process. This too is a pilot, so there is opportunity for learning, and we make changes as we go along. The last thing I'll say about the project management process, it is not easy. We present it to you now, it sounds wonderful, it sounds easy, but the process is something that would have been modified over time, and also it would have taken a lot of effort, in some cases tears. But it is important that we bear in mind that if we're going to do the work that we promise people that we're going to do, we must always hold before us the faces of those same people. When you go into a community like that and you see what is happening, when someone offers you a drink from a home that is dilapidated and falling apart, would you take that drink? Would you take that drink, or would you say to that person, no, I can't, I'm not thirsty right now? Engagement requires that you spend adequate time with that person. Take a drink, sit down and listen. And that person may be the one who carries the message for you later on. That person may be the one who stands up for you in a forum to say, give them a chance. The process of engagement requires that we remove whatever measure of whatever feeling we have inside of being proud and humble ourselves so that we can get the work done.
And I see one more question.
Hi. So going back to Cashew Hill, just trying to understand like the type of resilience that you're building in the community. Is it both physical in terms of, because you mentioned a lot about buildings. So what about ecosystem resilience? The area floods a lot, and I'm seeing that in the listing that had the eligible activities where you have like green infrastructure, green roofs, and things like that. Those are measures that will contribute to storm management and flood management, etc. So, what is the extent of the resilience building expectations? I guess, is it a balance of physical and ecosystem mirroring both together to achieve, the overall outcome? So, just if you could elaborate on that.
Okay, so it goes even further. Yes, we build resilience through strengthening the structures themselves, including modifying waterways, etc. Resilience is also built by engaging the people and training them. Sustaining a project is important. When we go to borrow 20, 30, not borrow, sorry, when we go to seek funding for 20, 30, 40 million, that's a lot of money. That is coming from some taxpayer in some other country, and we have to be very careful about that. So we must also put in place opportunities to sustain the process. We must ensure that the people understand what we're doing. That's a part of building the resilience. They understand what we're doing. They learn how better to adapt to what is happening. And they are able to sustain the infrastructure and the ideas that are put forward. For example, let us say that we get that waterway done. Maintaining the waterway is going to be important. Checking to see that we have reduced the mosquito population is important. That is a part of the resilience process. How do we get that done? We have engaged schools. We have engaged to produce fish, the small little fish to eat the larvae. We have engaged the community members themselves so that they can monitor the mosquito population. We have also engaged the persons from the Department of Health to work with them so that this can be done on the community level. So building resilience in infrastructure is one thing. Building resilience within the individuals themselves is another. And then sustaining that over a period of time is also important. As I mentioned to you before, and we will bear in mind this is about the surf, getting funding is important, but using the funding wisely and ensuring that it has maximum impact are also important.
Thank you so much, Craig. And I just noticed the time and we're actually over. So I just wanted to ask Craig and Krista if they have any, closing words, any sort of advice to people and countries wanting to program funds to vulnerable communities. What are the key, the key lessons they learned or the key advice that they would like to share with you? Just one thing.
All right. So I think the main point that I would more say is it's so important to have like those documents that are necessary to prove that you can carry out projects, you can manage projects, and it definitely was something that our department and in general, like governments, would need when they're applying for funding for proposals, to have that background information as proof of what they would have completed before, what they can complete, and to prove that they are capable, they do have that capacity to complete proposals.
Okay, in closing, I think Sasha mentioned earlier that we look at the GCF, AF, etc., and we say, okay, these guys are big guys, how do we handle them, etc. We're from a small island. In fact, our population is probably just about 2 times the size of that crowd that was that was demonstrating. The thing is that when we consider this, we need to bear in mind that they're humans just like us who are operating those entities. And we need not be afraid. We have within us the capacity to do certain things. What we need to do is build such relationships that we can advance the cause that is so important to all of us. That is what is important right now. And so if you desire to obtain accreditation for the GCF or for the Adaptation Fund, if you desire to access funding, always bear in mind that you're no less than anyone else. No matter what the situation is that is put before you, you're no less than someone else. That getting that measure of confidence at the beginning is important. Sustaining it, as we just mentioned a while ago, is also very important. Working together as a team, understanding that you have a goal before you and it will take some time to get it done. Have a measure of patience. Patience with yourself, patience with the persons around you, and patience with the stakeholders who are also depending on you to get the job done. And lastly, ensure that you go all the way. It is one thing to get the money to start something, but to have a white elephant there for years is not what is important. To go all the way and ensure that the project is completed and that people have benefited is important, regardless of the failures. And I wish to reiterate that. There will be failures. There's no perfect project. As we go along, there's the need to modify, there's the need to make changes, but we will fail at some point. The strength of character is important in rising up and completing the job. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Craig and Krista, and thank you all for being here, in person and virtually as well. And I hope you've learned from the experiences from the DOE team and the SAFE team in programming funds under the EDA project to vulnerable communities for resilience building. And afterwards, feel free to come and discuss with us. But now, I just want to say thank you all for being here. I hope you learned from us, and we definitely want to learn from others as well, how to improve this process, how to ensure that people who need access to finance, to help build resilience, to help adapt to climate change, are able to get this monies. We don't want it there waiting and people theorizing about transparency and accountability. We need to ensure that the money goes to the people who need it the most, because we can't wait 4 years from hurricanes Irma and Maria to still, people are still waiting for that money. We don't have time anymore for that. We have to ensure that the money goes to the people who need it the most, and that's what we have been doing here through the EDA project in Antigua and Barbuda, and soon, very soon, in Grenada and Dominica. So thanks for being here, and thanks for allowing us to share our lessons learned, our best practices, and we hope to learn from each other as well through this. Thank you all.